When a new medicine gets approved, we all put a lot of trust in the system, right? We believe it's gone through all this rigorous testing to keep us safe. But what if that system has a fundamental blind spot? Today, we're going to dig into the drug trial paradox and what it means for the real-world safety of the newest medicines on the shelf.
It's really the most basic question you can ask, isn't it? We rely on these new treatments, especially for really serious stuff, and we believe their risks have been thoroughly measured. But it turns out, the picture is a whole lot more complicated than you might think.
Okay, let's just start with a hard number that's pretty startling. For cancer patients, just starting a new drug can increase their risk of being hospitalized for a serious side effect by a staggering 250%. That is a massive jump. And the system that's designed to measure and communicate that risk is, of course, the clinical trial.
We've all heard this phrase a million times. Clinical trials are seen as the absolute peak of medical research. It's how we know if a drug works and if it's safe. It's the bedrock of modern medicine. But here's the thing. The strength of any standard really depends on what, and more importantly, who it's actually measuring.
And this right here is the absolute core of the issue. A gold standard is only useful if it actually reflects reality. So the crucial question becomes, are the people inside these trials anything like the people who will actually be taking the drug in the real world?
To get this, we need to talk about a key group, the high-risk patient. And when you hear that, don't picture some rare case. Honestly, this is the typical patient for so many conditions. We're talking about people managing other health problems, maybe they're a bit more frail, folks who are just naturally more susceptible to a drug's negative effects.
And this is where things get really wild. It's a complete paradox. High-risk patients experience 2.5 times more serious side effects from these new drugs. Okay, makes sense. Yet, they are 4 times less likely to be included in the clinical trials for those exact same drugs.
4 times less likely. Let that sink in. The very people most vulnerable to a drug's potential harms are the least represented in the safety data we collect before it gets approved. So what do you think happens when that drug leaves the carefully controlled lab and enters the real world?
Well, this is where that gap between the trial data and the patient reality starts to have some pretty serious consequences. I mean, it's just common sense. If a drug is tested mostly on the healthiest, strongest people, the results are naturally going to look a lot safer than they will be for the general population.
So how big is this blind spot really? Well, research suggests that because trials leave out so many of these high-risk patients, the data they produce understates the rate of serious adverse events by about 15%. We're only seeing about 85% of the full picture on risk. There's this whole other chunk of the story that's just missing.
Now, 15% might sound kind of abstract, but what does it actually mean for people? Well, it translates to 1 additional hospitalization from a serious side effect for every 25 patients treated for a year. Now think about the millions of people who might take a new drug, and that number suddenly becomes incredibly significant.
See, this isn't just some statistical quirk. It's a systemic problem in the whole drug approval pipeline. We've got to find a way to reconnect the world of clinical trials with the reality of actual patient care.
It all follows a pretty simple, logical chain. Step 1. The trials tend to screen for and select healthier participants. Step 2. Because of that, the safety data they gather naturally underestimates the potential for harm. And the final, real-world outcome in Step 3? The more vulnerable patients are the ones who can face a much greater risk of serious side effects than anyone expected.
So, why does this keep happening? Well, a key reason is that regulatory bodies like the FDA don't actually have formal rules requiring trial participants to be representative of the patients who will actually use the drug. This lack of regulation creates that critical blind spot we've been talking about, leaving the most vulnerable patients to bear the brunt of that information gap.
And that brings us to the final, challenging question. Look, clinical trials are still our best tool for checking out new medicines. But this evidence forces us to ask, if the people in the trials don't look like the people in the real world, how can we ensure the safety promises made in the lab actually hold up in the doctor's office? That question, well, it sits at the very heart of medical trust and patient safety.